I'm Sophia, 31, and the moment my husband Marcus introduced me to his parents, I knew I was being measured against an impossible standard. When they discovered I was a waitress at a local diner, their polite smiles couldn't hide the disappointment, flickering behind their eyes. What they didn't know was that beneath my apron and order pad lay a culinary passion that would eventually shock them all. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Marcus and I met on one of those rare Tuesday afternoons when Riverside Diner was nearly empty. I was wiping down tables after the lunch rush when he walked in, laptop bag slung over his shoulder, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He ordered black coffee and a turkey sandwich, then spent the next 3 hours hunched over his computer, occasionally glancing up when I refilled his cup. Most customers treated me like furniture, barely acknowledging my presence beyond placing their orders. Marcus was different. He asked about my day, remembered my name from the plastic tag pinned to my uniform, and left tips that suggested he understood what it meant to work for minimum wage plus gratuity. What struck me most wasn't his kindness, though that was refreshing. It was the way he talked about his work as a software developer, passionate about solving problems and creating something meaningful. I recognized that drive because it mirrored my own relationship with food, though he had no way of knowing that. Yet, our first real conversation happened during a particularly brutal dinner shift. The kitchen was backed up, customers were complaining, and I was juggling 8 tables while my coworker called in sick. Marcus had been waiting 20 minutes for his order when I finally approached his table, exhausted and apologetic. "I'm so sorry about the delay," I said, refilling his coffee for the 4th time. "The kitchen's completely overwhelmed tonight." Instead of joining the chorus of complaints, he smiled. "Rough night?" "The worst," I admitted, then caught myself. "I mean, not really, just busy." "You know," he said, leaning forward slightly, "I've been coming here for weeks, and you never seem to have a bad night. Even when things are falling apart, you handle it with more grace than most people manage on their best days." That observation caught me off guard. Most people saw the uniform, the tired feet, the sauce stain on my apron. Marcus saw me actually working, actually trying to make everyone's experience better despite impossible circumstances. Our relationship developed slowly, built on those late-night conversations after I'd finished my shift and he'd wrapped up his coding projects. We'd meet at the 24-hour coffee shop down the street, talking until dawn about everything and nothing. I told him about my dreams of opening my own restaurant someday, though I kept the details vague. He shared his frustrations with corporate bureaucracy and his hope of starting his own tech company. We bonded over our shared experience of having ambitions that felt simultaneously urgent and impossibly distant. 6 months into our relationship, Marcus still hadn't met the real me. He knew I was passionate about cooking, that I spent my free time experimenting with recipes, but he'd never tasted my food. Our dates happened away from kitchens, our conversations centered around his world, rather than mine. The first time I cooked for Marcus was also the first time I saw a genuine surprise cross his features. He'd come over after a particularly difficult day at work, stressed about a project deadline and talking about ordering takeout. Instead, I guided him to my tiny kitchen table and presented him with pan-seared duck breast with cherry gastrique, roasted fingerling potatoes with fresh herbs, and butter-poached asparagus. The silence that followed my placing the plate before him stretched long enough to make me nervous. Marcus stared at the carefully plated dish, then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You made this?" he asked, as if he needed confirmation. "I told you I like to cook," I said, suddenly self-conscious about the presentation. The sauce drizzle, the microgreens I'd arranged with tweezers. He took his first bite, chewed slowly, and his eyes widened. "Sophia, this is restaurant quality. This is better than restaurant quality." "It's just dinner," I deflected, but warmth spread through my chest at his reaction. "This is not just dinner," he said firmly. "This is incredible. How did you learn to cook like this?" That night, over a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion, I told Marcus about my real culinary background, how I'd graduated from Johnson & Wales with a degree in culinary arts, how I'd worked in professional kitchens for 3 years, climbing from prep cook to sous chef at 2 different restaurants. I explained how the restaurant industry's brutal hours, toxic culture, and razor-thin margins had eventually worn me down. How I'd burned out completely after working 80-hour weeks for a chef who screamed at his staff and treated creativity like insubordination. The diner job was supposed to be temporary, I confessed. Just something to pay the bills while I figured out my next move. But months turned into years, and I started to wonder if I'd made a mistake choosing this career path. Marcus listened without judgment, asking questions that showed he understood the complexity of my situation. He didn't try to fix my problems or offer unsolicited advice. He simply accepted that my relationship with cooking was complicated, marked by both passion and disappointment. What I didn't tell him that night was how cooking for him had reignited, something I'd thought was lost forever. Seeing his genuine appreciation, his amazement at flavors and techniques I'd almost forgotten I possessed, reminded me why I'd fallen in love with food in the first place. Over the following weeks, our dynamic shifted. Marcus became my unofficial taste tester, eager to try whatever I was experimenting with. I started pushing boundaries again, attempting dishes I hadn't made since culinary school, researching new techniques online, shopping at specialty markets I'd avoided while living on a diner salary. My small apartment kitchen became a laboratory. I'd spend my days off developing recipes, testing flavor combinations, documenting successes and failures in notebooks that began to pile up on my counter. Marcus would arrive after work to find me elbow-deep in some elaborate project, flour in my hair and sauce splattered across my apron. "You're different when you cook," he observed one evening, watching me plate a complex seafood dish with the precision of a surgeon. "More yourself, if that makes sense." It made perfect sense. In my diner uniform, taking orders and refilling coffee cups, I felt like I was playing a role. In my kitchen, creating something from nothing, transforming raw ingredients into experiences, I remembered who I actually was. Marcus proposed on a Tuesday night in my kitchen. I was testing a new dessert recipe, a dark chocolate tart with salted caramel and candied pistachios, when he dropped to one knee beside my counter. The ring was beautiful, but what moved me more was his words. "I want to spend my life with the woman who turns flour and butter into magic," he said. "I want to support your dreams the way you've supported mine. I want to be there when the world finally sees what I see every time you cook." Planning our wedding meant meeting Marcus's family properly for the first time. The Hendersons were old, money Boston, the kind of family that summered in Martha's Vineyard and wintered in Aspen. Marcus's father, Richard, was a senior partner at a prestigious law firm. His mother, Victoria, served on multiple charity boards and had never worked outside the home. They lived in a Georgian-style mansion in Beacon Hill, complete with a formal dining room, a library with leather-bound books, and oil paintings of ancestors I was expected to recognize and admire. The first time Marcus brought me home, I felt like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. Victoria Henderson was the kind of woman who made politeness feel like warfare. She had perfectly coiffed silver hair, wore pearls with her casual clothes, and possessed the ability to ask devastating questions while smiling warmly. "So, Sophia, dear," she said during our first dinner together, "Marcus tells us you work in food service. How lovely. Which restaurant?" "I work at Riverside Diner," I replied, immediately regretting how defensive I sounded. "A diner," Richard repeated, as if testing the word. "How authentic. And you've been there long?" "About 4 years," I said, aware that Marcus was shifting uncomfortably in his chair. 4 years, Victoria mused. Well, everyone has to start somewhere, don't they? I'm sure you'll find your way to something more suitable eventually. The conversation continued in this vein throughout the evening. They asked about my family background, my education, my future plans, each question designed to highlight the gulf between their world and mine. When I mentioned my culinary degree, Richard seemed skeptical that such a thing existed at accredited institutions. "Cooking school?" he said with a slight smile. "How modern. In my day, women learned to cook, from their mothers and grandmothers. It's actually quite rigorous," I began. But Victoria interrupted. "Oh, I'm sure it is, dear. All that chopping and measuring must be very precise work." Marcus tried to redirect the conversation, talking about his work projects and asking his parents about their recent vacation to Italy. But I could feel their assessment continuing throughout the meal, their polite interest masking deeper reservations. After dinner, while Marcus helped his father with something in the study, Victoria invited me for coffee in her sitting room. The space was decorated in muted blues and creams, everything perfectly coordinated and expensive-looking. "You seem like a nice girl, Sophia," she began, settling into a wingback chair with her delicate china cup. "And Marcus is clearly quite taken with you." "I love him very much," I said, sensing a but approaching. "I'm sure you do." But love, while important, isn't always enough for a successful marriage. Compatibility matters. Shared backgrounds, similar. Goals, matching social circles. She paused to sip her coffee, letting her words settle. "Marcus has always been somewhat romantic about the real world. He sees the best in people, sometimes to his detriment. I worry that he doesn't fully understand the challenges of building a life with someone from such a different background." Different. "How?" I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. "Well, dear, Marcus is likely to inherit significant family wealth someday. He moves in certain circles, has certain expectations about his future wife's role in society. Being married to a diner waitress, well, it might limit his opportunities." The words stung because they carried just enough truth to be devastating. I was a diner waitress, at least professionally. Marcus did move in circles where wives were expected to organize charity luncheons rather than work for hourly wages. Their concerns weren't entirely unreasonable, even if they were delivered with surgical precision. "I understand your concerns," I said carefully. "But I think you might be underestimating both Marcus and me." Victoria smiled, the expression perfectly pleasant and completely cold. "Perhaps. Though I've found that people rarely surprise us in the ways we hope they will." Driving home that night, Marcus was quiet until I finally asked what he was thinking. "My parents can be intense," he said finally. "They mean well, but they have very specific ideas about how life should work. They think I'm not good enough for you," I said bluntly. "They think anyone wouldn't be good enough for me," he replied. "But they'll come around once they get to know you better." I wanted to believe him, but Victoria's words echoed in my mind. Maybe they were right. Maybe love wasn't enough to bridge the gap between their world and mine. Maybe I was being naive to think I could fit into Marcus's life without losing essential parts of myself. The engagement period brought more interactions with the Henderson family, each one reinforcing my outsider status. Victoria planned elaborate dinner parties where I felt like a curiosity being displayed for their social circle. Richard made jokes about working-class values that weren't quite cruel enough to call out directly. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Marcus's sister Caroline, a corporate attorney married to another corporate attorney, was perhaps the most direct in her disapproval. During a family barbecue, she cornered me by the beverage station. "You know," she said, refilling her wine glass, "I've never understood the appeal of service work. All that standing, dealing with difficult customers, working for tips. It seems so uncertain. It has its challenges. I agreed neutrally. I imagine it does, though I suppose some people find comfort in routine, in knowing exactly what's expected of them each day. Not everyone is cut out for more demanding careers. Her tone suggested she was offering me an exit ramp, a way to agree that my ambitions were appropriately limited. Instead, I found myself saying, "Actually, I find the work quite demanding in its own way, and I've never been particularly comfortable with routine." Caroline's eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh? And what would you prefer to be doing?" For a moment, I considered telling her the truth. About my culinary training, my professional experience, my dreams of running my own kitchen again someday. But something in her expression, expectant and slightly amused, made me realize she was asking the question as a trap rather than genuine curiosity. "I'm still figuring that out," I said instead. "Well," she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "you have plenty of time to decide. Though I suppose once you and Marcus have children, career concerns become somewhat academic anyway, thus." Assumption that I would automatically abandon any professional aspirations after marriage was stated so casually, so matter-of-factly, that I almost didn't know how to respond. In their world, apparently, women like me were expected to be grateful for the opportunity to trade up from working-class struggle to upper-class domesticity. These interactions left me feeling increasingly isolated from Marcus, who seemed genuinely oblivious to the subtle ways his family was undermining my confidence. When I tried to explain how their comments made me feel, he dismissed my concerns as oversensitivity. "They're just getting to know you," he'd say. "They don't mean anything by it." But I could see the doubt creeping into his own eyes. The way he hesitated before introducing me at his company's holiday party. How he seemed relieved when I suggested staying home rather than attending his law school reunion. His family's assessment of our relationship was affecting his perception of me, even if he didn't realize it. The breaking point came 3 months before our wedding, at what was supposed to be a celebration dinner for Marcus's promotion to senior developer. The entire Henderson family gathered at their favorite restaurant, an establishment where the waitstaff wore tuxedos and the wine list required a sommelier to navigate. I had dressed carefully for the occasion, wearing a black dress. Marcus had bought me for my birthday, and the pearl earrings Victoria had given me as an early wedding present. I thought I looked appropriate, even elegant, but I could tell from the family's expressions that I'd somehow missed the mark again. The evening progressed predictably, with conversation flowing around topics I couldn't fully participate in. Richard discussed recent changes in tax law with Caroline and her husband. Victoria described the latest drama from her garden club meetings. Marcus talked about his new responsibilities at work, but even his achievements were contextualized within family expectations, rather than celebrated as individual accomplishments. I was picking at my sea base, trying to stay engaged with a discussion about summer house renovations, when our server approached the table. She was young, probably college-aged, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested she was still learning the complex choreography of fine dining service. As she began clearing our appetizer plates, she accidentally knocked over Victoria's water glass, sending ice and liquid cascading across the pristine white tablecloth and onto Victoria's silk blouse. The reaction was immediate and brutal. Victoria gasped as if she'd been personally assaulted, jumping back from the table while water dripped from her expensive clothing. Richard's face darkened with the kind of anger reserved for service industry mistakes that inconvenienced his family. "How incredibly careless," Victoria said sharply, holding her blouse away from her body. "This is silk. Do you realize that? Dry cleaning might not even save it." The young server was mortified, apologizing profusely while trying to clean up the mess with her small service towel. Her hands were shaking, and I could see tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," she kept repeating. "Please let me get the manager. We'll take care of your cleaning bill, of course." "You certainly will," Richard said coldly. though I have to wonder what kind of training you people receive. This is supposed to be a quality establishment. Marcus looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Caroline and her husband exchanged knowing looks, as if this was exactly the kind of disruption they expected from service workers. The server continued apologizing, her voice getting smaller with each word. Watching this young woman being humiliated for an honest mistake triggered something deep in my chest. I thought about every difficult customer I'd ever served at the diner. Every person who'd treated me as if I were less than human because I brought them food and cleaned up their messes. I thought about the contempt I'd endured from this very family, their assumption that my work made me somehow lesser. It was an accident, I said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. The table fell silent. Victoria looked at me as if I'd spoken out of turn at a funeral. "Excuse me?" she said. "It was clearly an accident," I repeated, my voice stronger now. "She's doing her best in a very demanding job, and mistakes happen. There's no need to humiliate her." Richard's expression hardened. "Sophia, I don't think you understand the situation." "I understand it perfectly," I said, surprising myself with my firmness. "I understand what it's like to work in food service, to deal with customers who think your humanity disappears when you put on an apron." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, somewhere between admiration and horror. The young server had paused in her cleanup, looking at me with gratitude and confusion. Victoria recovered first, her voice ice-cold with controlled fury. "I see. Well, perhaps your professional experience gives you a different perspective on appropriate service standards." The way she said professional experience made it sound like something distasteful, a character flaw rather than honest work. At that moment, I realized that nothing I did would ever be enough for this family. I would always be just a waitress. In their eyes, regardless of my education, my skills, or my dreams. The aftermath of that dinner was a week of silent treatment from Victoria and pointed comments from Richard. Marcus found himself caught between defending me and maintaining family peace, a position that revealed cracks in our relationship I'd never noticed before. "You embarrassed them in public," he said during one of our increasingly tense conversations. "Whatever your intentions were, you made them look bad in front of the staff." "I defended someone who was being treated unfairly," I replied. "Since when is basic human decency embarrassing?" "That's not the point, Sophia. There's a way to handle these situations, and causing a scene isn't it." The word scene stung. Standing up for a young woman being humiliated was now classified as causing drama. I began to wonder if Marcus truly saw me as an equal partner, or if he, like his family, viewed me as someone who needed to be managed and contained. Our wedding preparations continued, but the joy had drained out of them. Victoria took control of most decisions, booking vendors and making choices that reflected her taste rather than mine. When I suggested a more casual reception venue, she looked at me as if I'd proposed holding the ceremony in a barn. "The Peninsula Club has hosted Henderson family celebrations for 3 generations, she informed me. "I think we can trust their standards." Marcus supported his mother's choices, arguing that the details didn't matter as long as we ended up married. But every decision felt like another step away from the life I'd envisioned for myself, another compromise that chipped away at my sense of identity. The breaking point came during a cake tasting at Victoria's preferred bakery. We sat in their elegant showroom, sampling delicate flavors while the baker explained their signature techniques. Victoria had already chosen the design, a towering white creation with sugar flowers that would photograph beautifully but offered no personality or meaning. "Now for the flavors," the baker announced, presenting us with tiny squares arranged on china plates. "We have classic vanilla bean, chocolate ganache, lemon curd, and our specialty lavender honey." I tasted each sample dutifully, but my mind was elsewhere. These flavors were safe, predictable, chosen to offend no one while inspiring no one either. They reminded me of the carefully controlled life Victoria was orchestrating for me. Beautiful on the surface, but lacking any authentic flavor. "The vanilla bean is lovely," Victoria declared. "Classic and elegant, perfect for photographs." "What about the lavender honey?" I asked. "It's more interesting." Victoria's smile tightened. "Interesting can be risky, dear. We want something everyone will enjoy." "But it's our wedding," I said, hearing the frustration creep into my voice. "Shouldn't it reflect what we actually like?" "Of course, dear, but it's also a celebration for our guests. We need to consider their preferences as well." Marcus nodded in agreement, and I felt something inside me snap. Every choice was being filtered through other people's expectations, every personal preference dismissed as impractical or inappropriate. I was becoming a prop in their vision of a perfect wedding, my actual opinions irrelevant to the outcome. That night, I called my best friend Carmen, the only person who knew the full story of my culinary background. She'd been my roommate in culinary school, the one who'd held my hand through brutal kitchen shifts and celebrated my small victories. "They're erasing you," she said bluntly after I'd described the latest wedding planning session. "Piece by piece, they're turning you into their version of an acceptable wife." "Maybe they're right," I admitted. "Maybe I don't know how to fit into Marcus's world." "The question isn't whether you can fit into their world," Carmen replied. "The question is whether you want to disappear into it." Her words haunted me for days. I'd spent months trying to prove myself worthy of the Henderson family's approval, but I was beginning to understand that their approval required me to become someone else entirely. The revelation came unexpectedly during a mundane Tuesday afternoon, at the diner. I was serving lunch to the usual crowd of construction workers and office employees when a woman in an expensive suit walked in. She looked out of place among the vinyl booths and laminated menus, but she sat down at one of my tables and ordered coffee. "Excuse me," she said as I refilled her cup. "Are you Sophia Martinez?" I nodded, suddenly wary. People in expensive suits didn't usually know my name. "I'm Jennifer Walsh from Food and Wine magazine. I've been trying to reach you about an interview." My blood ran cold. "I think you have the wrong person." "You worked at Meridian Restaurant 3 years ago, correct? Under Chef Antoine Dubois?" The mention of Antoine's name sent a jolt through me. Meridian had been my last professional kitchen job, the place where I'd finally burned out on the restaurant industry's brutal culture. "I don't work in restaurants anymore," I said carefully. "I know. But Chef Dubois mentioned you in an interview we did last month. He said you were one of the most talented cooks he'd ever worked with, that your dessert innovations helped earn Meridian its James Beard nomination." I stared at her, confusion replacing my initial panic. "Antoine said that? He said you disappeared from the industry just as you were hitting your stride. He's been wondering what happened to you." Jennifer pulled out a tablet and showed me an article titled, "Lost Talents, Where Are They Now?" My photograph from 3 years ago stared back at me, taken during a food festival where I'd presented my signature chocolate tart with sea salt and olive oil. "We're doing a follow-up piece on promising young chefs who left the industry," Jennifer continued. "Chef Dubois insisted we include you. He said you had the potential to be one of the greats." The conversation lasted 20 minutes, Jennifer asking about my current work and future plans while I struggled to process this information. Antoine Dubois, the chef who'd made my life miserable with his perfectionism and volcanic temper, apparently remembered me as a talent worth celebrating. "If you ever decide to return to the industry," Jennifer said as she prepared to leave, "you should know that people are still talking about your work. That chocolate tart recipe has been requested by every food blogger who's ever eaten at Meridian." After she left, I stood behind the diner counter in a daze. The life I'd been trying to escape, the career I'd convinced myself was a dead end, had apparently continued without me. My reputation, my creativity, my contributions to the industry hadn't disappeared just because I'd walked away. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Antoine Dubois. His voice was exactly as I remembered, heavily accented, and slightly impatient. Sophia? Mon Dieu, where have you been hiding? I've been taking a break from the industry, I said, feeling foolish. A break? For 3 years? What kind of break is this? I explained my burnout, my disillusionment with restaurant culture, and my decision to step away from professional cooking. Antoine listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of understanding. You know, he said when I finished, I have been thinking about you. That dessert menu you created for our spring season was magnifique. I still use 2 of your recipes. You do? Of course. Why do you think I told that journalist about you? You had something special, Sophia. You understood how to make people feel with food, not just taste. We talked for an hour, Antoine updating me on industry changes and mutual acquaintances. Several of our former colleagues had opened their own restaurants. Others had won awards or gained recognition for their work. The culinary world had kept moving without me, but there was still a place for me in it if I wanted to return. There is a position opening at Le Bernardin, Antoine mentioned casually. Pastry chef. They asked me for recommendations. My heart skipped. Le Bernardin was legendary, the kind of place where careers were made and culinary history was written. Don't think I'm ready for that level, I said automatically. Bah! You were ready 3 years ago. You are more than ready now. Send them your portfolio. I don't have a current portfolio. Then make one. Cook, create, document your work. Show them who you really are, not who you think they want you to be. After hanging up, I sat in my apartment kitchen surrounded by the notebooks and recipes I'd been developing for Marcus. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of genuine excitement about my future. The contrast between my conversation with Antoine and my daily interactions with the Henderson family was stark. Antoine saw my potential and pushed me to pursue. The Hendersons saw my ambitions as problems to be managed and contained. I spent the next week secretly working on new recipes, testing ideas that had been percolating in my mind during my time away from professional kitchens. My apartment is filled with the smells of caramelized sugar, fresh herbs, and complex spice blends. Marcus noticed the change in my mood, but misinterpreted its source. You seem happier lately, he observed one evening as I plated a new dessert. Creation for him to try. I've been cooking more, I said, which was true if incomplete. Good. Maybe you're finally getting this out of your system. His words stopped me cold. Getting what out of my system? This intense cooking phase you've been in. I know you love it, but it's been consuming a lot of your time and energy. I figured you'd eventually find a more balanced approach. I stared at him, realizing that he viewed my passion for cooking the same way his parents did, as a hobby that needed to be contained within appropriate boundaries. What if I don't want to get it out of my system? I asked. What if this is who I am? Marcus laughed, assuming I was joking. Come on, Sophia. You can't build a career around making fancy desserts in your apartment. But I could. That was exactly what I could do, what I was trained to do, what I'd been avoiding out of fear and self-doubt. That night, I began preparing my portfolio for Le Bernardin. I photographed my latest creations, wrote detailed descriptions of my techniques and inspirations, and crafted a cover letter that honestly described my hiatus from the industry and my desire to return. For the first time since my engagement, I felt like I was moving toward something I wanted, rather than away from something I feared. Submitting my portfolio to Le Bernardin felt like jumping off a cliff. I sent the email at 2 a.m., when the weight of secrecy finally became unbearable. Within 48 hours, I received a response from their executive pastry chef requesting a phone interview. The conversation lasted 2 hours. Chef Patricia Winters asked detailed questions about my techniques, my inspirations, and my vision for modern pastry. She didn't ask why I'd left the industry or why I was working at a diner. She was interested in my capabilities, not my circumstances. "We'd like you to come in for a practical interview," she said at the end of our call. "Can you be here Thursday at 6 a.m.? My hands shook as I wrote down the details. A practical interview at Le Bernardin meant cooking in their kitchen, demonstrating my skills under pressure, proving I belonged among the city's culinary elite. I took Thursday off from the diner, telling my manager I had a doctor's appointment. Marcus was in meetings all day, unaware I'd left the apartment at 4 a.m. to catch the train into Manhattan. Walking into Le Bernardin's kitchen was like entering a cathedral of culinary excellence. The equipment gleamed under pristine lighting, every surface spotless, every tool precisely placed. The early morning prep crew moved with balletic efficiency, their movements economical and purposeful. Chef Winters greeted me personally, introducing me to her team before explaining the challenge. I had 3 hours to create a dessert course that would complement their tasting menu, using ingredients available in their pantry. "We're looking for technical excellence, creativity, and understanding of flavor balance," she explained. "Show us who you are as a pastry chef." The kitchen fell into focused quiet as I surveyed my options. Fresh berries, premium chocolate, exotic spices, artisanal flowers. I closed my eyes and let my instincts guide me, remembering the feeling of creating something beautiful from raw materials. I decided on a deconstructed lemon tart with brown butter ice cream, candied fennel pollen, and a tuile made from black sesame. The flavors were bold but harmonious, the presentation elegant but not ostentatious. It represented everything I'd learned during my years away from professional kitchens, a synthesis of classical technique and personal vision. Working in that kitchen awakened muscle memory I'd forgotten I possessed. My knife work was precise, my timing instinctive. I felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came from performing under pressure. The satisfaction of watching separate components come together into something greater than their parts. When I presented my dessert to the tasting panel, I held my breath. Chef Winters took the first bite, her expression neutral as she considered the flavors. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes before she smiled. "This is exceptional work," she said. "The flavor profile is sophisticated. The technique is flawless, and the presentation shows real artistic vision." The other panel members nodded in agreement, offering detailed feedback that showed they understood and appreciated what I'd created. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen by people who understood my craft. "We'd like to offer you a position," Chef Winters said as I cleaned my station. "Senior pastry chef, immediate start if you're available." The salary she mentioned was triple what I made at the diner. The opportunity to work alongside some of the world's best chefs was priceless. But accepting meant revealing the truth about my background to Marcus and his family, confronting the lie I'd been living by omission. "I need some time to consider," I said, though every instinct screamed at me to accept immediately. "Of course, but don't wait too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often." The train ride home was a blur of conflicting emotions. Elation at being offered a position at one of the country's most prestigious restaurants warred with anxiety about the conversations I'd need to have with Marcus and his family. I arrived at our apartment to find Marcus waiting with takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant and a bottle of wine. His smile dimmed when he saw my expression. "How was your doctor's appointment?" he asked. The lie sat heavy on my tongue. "Fine, just routine." We ate dinner in relative quiet, Marcus trying to engage me in conversation while I wrestled with how to reveal what had happened. Finally, as he opened the wine, I found my courage. "Marcus, there's something I need to tell you." He set down his glass, immediately alert to the seriousness in my voice. "I wasn't at a doctor's appointment today. I was interviewing for a job." "A job? What kind of job?" "Le Bernardin offered me a position as senior pastry chef." The words hung in the air between us. Marcus blinked several times, processing information that didn't fit with his understanding of my capabilities or ambitions. "Le Bernardin? The restaurant?" one of the best restaurants in the city. They want me to start immediately. But how? Why? I don't understand how this happened. I took a deep breath and began explaining about the food and wine interview, my conversation with Antoine, the portfolio I'd secretly prepared. As I spoke, Marcus's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching betrayal. "You've been planning this behind my back," he said when I finished. "I've been exploring options. I didn't expect it to happen so quickly." "Options for what?" "We're getting married in 2 months. We have plans, commitments, a future we've been building together. All of which can accommodate my having a real career." Marcus stood up and began pacing our small living room. "This isn't just about a career, Sophia. This is about completely changing who you are, what we are together. No, it's about me finally being who I actually am instead of pretending to be someone else." "Pretending?" His voice rose. "When have you ever pretended to be someone else?" The question revealed how little he truly understood about the compromises I'd been making. "Every time I smile politely while your mother criticizes my choices. Every time I agree to wedding plans that have nothing to do with what I actually want. Every time I downplay my ambitions to make everyone else comfortable." Our argument escalated quickly, years of unspoken tensions finally erupting. Marcus accused me of being dishonest and manipulative. I accused him of wanting a wife who would disappear into his family's expectations. "My parents were right about you," he said at one point, the words like a physical blow. "You're never going to be satisfied with a stable, normal life. You always need more drama, more attention, more validation." "Your parents don't know anything about me," I shot back. "They've never bothered to learn who I actually am beyond my job title. And apparently neither have I, since you've been living some secret life I never knew about." The fight ended with Marcus storming out, leaving me alone with the takeout containers and the weight of decisions that would determine the rest of my life. I called Carmen, needing to hear a voice that understood my dilemma. "He's scared," she said after I'd recounted the evening's events. "He's realizing that the woman he thought he was marrying doesn't actually exist." "Maybe she doesn't," I admitted. "Maybe I've been trying so hard to fit into his world that I lost track of my own identity. The question is whether you can find a way back to yourself while staying in this relationship, or whether you need to choose between Sophia the chef and Sophia the fiancée." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, weighing the costs and benefits of different paths forward. Le Bernardin represented everything I'd ever wanted professionally, but accepting meant potentially losing the man I loved and the life we'd planned together. By morning, Marcus still hadn't returned. I found a text message apologizing for storming out but asking for time to process everything I'd revealed. His absence gave me space to think clearly about what I actually wanted versus what I thought I should want. I spent the day researching Le Bernardin's recent menus, reading interviews with their culinary team, imagining myself as part of their creative process. The excitement was undeniable, but so was the fear of losing Marcus and facing his family's reaction to my deception. When Marcus finally came home that evening, he looked exhausted. We sat at our kitchen table, the same place where we'd shared so many meals and conversations, and tried to find a path forward. "I've been thinking all day," he said, "about us, about what you told me, about what this means for our future." I waited, afraid to breathe. "I love you, Sophia, but I'm not sure I know who you really are anymore. I'm the same person I've always been. I just haven't been showing you all the parts of myself. But those parts are important parts. Your ambitions, your talents, your professional identity. How could I not know about something so central to who you are?" It was a fair question, one that forced me to examine my own role in creating the gap between my authentic self and the version I'd presented to his family. "I was afraid," I admitted. "Afraid you'd see me differently. Afraid your family would have even more reasons to disapprove of me. So you decided to lie instead?" "I decided to survive instead." Your family made it clear from day one that I wasn't good enough as I was, so I tried to become someone who might be good enough. Marcus was quiet for a long time, processing the implications of my confession. "What do you want to do about Le Bernardin?" he finally asked. The question felt like a test, though I wasn't sure what the right answer was supposed to be. "I want to accept the position," I said, the words coming out stronger than I felt. "This is the opportunity I've been working toward my entire career." Marcus nodded slowly, though I could see the struggle in his eyes. "Then you should take it." "Just like that?" "No, not just like that. But I can't ask you to give up your dreams. Because they're inconvenient for my family." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by apprehension. "Your parents are going to be furious." "Probably, but that's my problem to handle, not yours." The next morning, I called Chef Winters to accept the position. My start date was set for the following Monday, giving me just enough time to submit my resignation at the diner and prepare for the most challenging role of my career. Leaving the diner felt surreal. My coworkers threw a small farewell party during the dinner shift, presenting me with a card signed by regular customers who'd heard about my new job. Several people mentioned they'd always known I was destined for something bigger. Comments. That made me wonder how obvious my restlessness had been. "You better not forget us little people when you're famous," joked Tommy, the line cook who'd become a friend over the years. "Famous?" I laughed. "I'm just changing jobs." Le Bernardin isn't just changing jobs, said Maria, our manager. "That's like saying moving from community theater to Broadway is just changing venues." Her comment stayed with me as I cleaned out my locker for the last time. Was I ready for this level of pressure and scrutiny? The diner had been comfortable, predictable, safe. Le Bernardin represented everything I'd once wanted, but had convinced myself I wasn't qualified to pursue. Marcus insisted on driving me to work on my first day, despite my protests that I could take the train. "I want to see where my fiancé works," he said, though I caught him practicing the word fiancé as if it felt different now. The kitchen at Le Bernardin during morning prep was a symphony of controlled chaos. 40 chefs working in perfect eye. Synchronization, each focused on their specific responsibilities while contributing to the greater whole. I was assigned to the pastry station with 2 other chefs, tasked with executing the dessert menu for that evening's service. Chef Winters introduced me to the team during the morning briefing, explaining my background and role. I caught several curious glances, aware that my hiring had probably generated gossip. New senior pastry chefs didn't usually come from diner jobs, regardless of their previous experience. My first week was a trial by fire. The pace was relentless, the standards impossibly high, the margin for error non-existent. Every plate had to be perfect, every element precisely executed, every timing coordination flawless. I worked 12-hour days, arriving before dawn and leaving after midnight, my feet screaming and my hands cramped from repetitive motions, but I loved every exhausting minute of it. The creativity required to execute complex desserts at volume, the teamwork necessary to coordinate with other stations, the satisfaction of seeing diners' faces light up when they tasted my creations. This was what I'd been missing during my years at the diner, the sense of using my full capabilities in service of something meaningful. Marcus tried to be supportive, but the demands of my new schedule strained our relationship. I was too tired for long conversations when I got home, too focused on work to give him the attention he was used to receiving. Our wedding planning stalled as I struggled to balance my new responsibilities with personal commitments. "I barely see you anymore," he complained one evening after I'd fallen asleep during a movie we'd planned to watch together. "It's just while I'm getting established," I said, though I wasn't sure that was true. Professional kitchens demanded total commitment, and I was finally in a position worthy of that dedication. The real test came 3 weeks into my new job when Victoria Henderson made an unexpected appearance at the restaurant. I was in the middle of dinner service, focused on plating a complex chocolate souffle, when one of the servers mentioned that Mrs. Henderson was dining in the main room. My hands paused momentarily before continuing their work. Victoria was here, to spy on me, to see for herself what I was actually doing instead of serving coffee and eggs at a diner. The knowledge that she was evaluating my performance added an extra layer of pressure to an already intense evening. During a brief lull between courses, I risked a glance through the pass window into the dining room. Victoria sat at a corner table with two other elegantly dressed women, their conversation animated as they waited for dessert service. She looked completely at ease in Le Bernardin's sophisticated atmosphere, belonging in a way I still felt I was learning to navigate. When their dessert order came through, my heart rate spiked. Table 12 had ordered the tasting menu's final course, my signature lemon creation that had helped me secure this position. Victoria Henderson would be tasting my food, judging not just its technical execution, but what it revealed about my capabilities and ambitions. I assembled the plate with extra care, ensuring every component was positioned perfectly, every sauce drizzle precisely placed. The dessert looked like edible art, a testament to years of training and natural talent that Victoria had never suspected I possessed. "Chef, Table 12 is requesting to speak with the pastry chef," the server reported after delivering the desserts. My blood ran cold. Victoria wanted to confront me publicly in front of my new colleagues and the restaurant's prestigious clientele. I looked to Chef Winters, who nodded encouragingly. "She specifically asked for the person who created the lemon dessert," the server continued. "They want to offer compliments. Compliments." I walked into the dining room with my heart pounding, unsure whether I was heading toward validation or humiliation. Victoria looked up as I approached her table, her expression cycling through surprise, recognition, and something I couldn't quite identify. Her dining companions were smiling warmly, clearly having enjoyed their meal. "You're the pastry chef?" one of them asked. "Yes, I'm Sophia Martinez." "This dessert is extraordinary," the woman continued. "The flavor combinations are so sophisticated, and the presentation is absolutely beautiful." "Thank you," I managed, hyper-aware of Victoria's intense scrutiny. "Where did you train?" asked the second woman. "Your technique is flawless." I began explaining my background, mentioning Johnson & Wales and my previous restaurant experience. Victoria's friends asked intelligent questions about my creative process and inspiration, clearly knowledgeable about fine dining and culinary arts. Throughout the conversation, Victoria remained silent, her face unreadable. When her friends finally finished their questions and I prepared to return to the kitchen, she spoke for the first time. "Sophia, could I have a word with you privately?" My colleagues were watching from the kitchen window. Other diners had begun to notice our interaction. Whatever Victoria intended to say would have an audience, making her request for privacy somewhat meaningless. "Of course," I said, stepping slightly away from her table. "I had no idea," she said quietly, her voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "About your training, your experience, your capabilities." "I tried to tell you," I replied, though that wasn't entirely true. I'd hinted at my culinary background, but had never fully revealed the extent of my professional experience. "Marcus never mentioned that you'd worked in restaurants like this." Marcus didn't know either. I hadn't been cooking professionally for several years when we met. Victoria processed this information, her expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. "For the first time since I'd known her, why didn't you tell us? About your career, your achievements?" The question was asked with genuine curiosity rather than accusation, catching me off guard. "I wasn't sure it mattered. You seemed convinced that being a waitress defined everything important about my character." Victoria flinched slightly at my directness. "I may have jumped to conclusions about your ambitions and capabilities." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was the closest thing to one I'd ever received from her. "I should return to the kitchen," I said. "We're in the middle of service." "Of course. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. As I walked back toward the kitchen, I caught fragments of conversation from Victoria's table. Her friends were clearly impressed, praising both the food and my professionalism. One mentioned knowing food critics who would be interested in featuring my work. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of adrenaline and satisfaction. I'd survived my first direct encounter with Victoria in my professional environment, proving my capabilities in a context she couldn't dismiss or minimize. Marcus was waiting when I got home, sitting at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee and an expression I couldn't read. "My mother came to see you tonight," he said without preamble. "I know. She was there during dinner service. She called me afterward. She seemed different. Confused, maybe. About what? About you. About who you actually are versus who she thought you were." I sat down across from him, suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the physical demands of my job. She said, "Your food was exceptional, that you handled the interaction with complete professionalism despite everything that's happened. Between you, I was doing my job." She also said she owes you an apology, that she misjudged your character and your potential. Victoria Henderson, admitting she'd been wrong about something, seemed impossible to believe. "What did you tell her?" "That I was proud of you. That I should have defended you better from the beginning. That I was learning who you really are, just like she was." Marcus reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm sorry, Sophia. For not seeing you clearly, for not supporting your ambitions, for letting my family's opinions matter more than your happiness." The apology felt genuine, but I could sense there was more he wanted to say. "There's something else," he continued. "My mother wants to host a dinner party. To properly introduce you to their social circle as the accomplished chef you actually are, rather than the waitress they thought they were tolerating." The irony was almost overwhelming. Now that Victoria understood my professional status, she wanted to show me off to their friends, to claim credit for supporting my career rather than attempting to sabotage it. "What do you think about that?" Marcus asked. I considered the offer carefully. Part of me wanted to refuse, to maintain my independence from their social expectations, but another part recognized this as an opportunity to rewrite the narrative of my relationship with his family, to establish myself as an equal rather than a charity case they'd reluctantly accepted. "I think," I said finally, "that it might be interesting to see how they treat me when they think I'm worth their respect." Victoria's dinner party was scheduled for a Saturday evening, 2 weeks after her visit to Le Bernardin. The guest list read like a who's who of Boston society: prominent lawyers, successful business people, influential philanthropists, and their equally accomplished spouses. I would be presented not as Marcus's waitress fiancée, but as Sophia Martinez, rising culinary talent. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same woman who had spent months trying to minimize my presence in her son's life was now eager to display me as a trophy, proof of the Henderson family's ability to recognize and cultivate exceptional talent. "She wants to serve your dessert at dinner," Marcus told me during one of our morning conversations. "Something signature that represents your style. She wants me to cater my own introduction party. She wants to showcase your abilities. Isn't that what you wanted?" It was and it wasn't. I'd wanted respect and recognition, but on my own terms, not as part of Victoria's carefully orchestrated social theater. The week leading up to the dinner was intense at Le Bernardin. We were preparing for a visit from James Beard Foundation judges, who would be dining anonymously to evaluate restaurants for the upcoming award nominations. The entire kitchen operated under heightened pressure, every dish scrutinized for perfection. "Chef Winters pulled me aside during prep one afternoon. "I've heard you're developing quite a reputation around the city," she said. "Food critics are starting to ask specifically about our pastry program." "Really?" "The Times reviewer was in last week. She ordered 3 of your desserts and asked to speak with you, but you'd already left for the evening." My heart raced. The New York Times food critic knew my name, was interested in my work specifically. It felt surreal after years of anonymity at the diner. There's something else, Chef Winters continued. The James Beard Foundation called. You've been nominated for Outstanding Pastry Chef. The words didn't register immediately. James Beard. Nominations were the highest honor in American cuisine, reserved for chefs who had demonstrated exceptional skill and innovation over sustained periods. That's impossible, I said. I've only been back in professional kitchens for a month. The nomination is based on your entire body of work, including your time at Meridian and your recent achievements here. Apparently, several prominent food writers have been following your career trajectory. I thought about the Food and Wine interview, the industry connections I'd maintained even during my hiatus, the reputation that had apparently continued growing in my absence. The award ceremony is next month in Chicago, Chef Winters said. The restaurant will cover your expenses, of course. This kind of recognition reflects well on our entire program. Walking home that evening, I felt disconnected from reality. 6 weeks ago, I'd been serving coffee and eggs at a neighborhood diner. Now I was a James Beard nominee, working at one of the country's premier restaurants, preparing to be showcased at a high society dinner party. Marcus was ecstatic when I told him about the nomination. This is incredible, Sophia. Do you realize what this means? It means I get to attend a fancy ceremony where I probably won't win. It means you're being recognized as one of the best pastry chefs in the country. My parents are going to be amazed. The mention of his parents brought me back to earth. This nomination would fundamentally alter how the Henderson family viewed me, transforming me from an embarrassing mistake into a valuable asset. We should tell them at the dinner party, Marcus suggested. It would be the perfect moment. Or we could wait until after the ceremony. See if I actually win anything before making a big announcement. But I knew Marcus was right. The nomination itself was newsworthy, the kind of achievement that would force Victoria and Richard to completely reassess their understanding of my capabilities and potential. Saturday arrived with unseasonable warmth for early autumn. I spent the morning at Le Bernardin, preparing individual chocolate tarts with salted caramel and gold leaf for Victoria's dinner party. The desserts were beautiful, technically complex, and utterly delicious. They would serve as both my contribution to the meal and my artistic statement to the Henderson family's social circle. I arrived at the Henderson house an hour before the guests, carrying my carefully packed desserts and wearing a navy dress. That struck the right balance between professional and elegant. Victoria greeted me at the door with unusual warmth. Sophia, dear, you look lovely, and these desserts smell absolutely divine. The transformation in her manner was startling. Where, once she'd barely acknowledged my presence, she now seemed genuinely pleased to see me. I wasn't naive enough to think this represented a complete change of heart, but it suggested she was capable of adapting her opinions when presented with compelling evidence. I've told everyone about your position at Le Bernardin, she continued, leading me toward the kitchen. They're all very eager to meet you. The kitchen was a flurry of activity as caterers prepared the main courses. Victoria had hired professionals for everything except dessert, elevating my contribution to a place of special significance. As guests began arriving, I positioned myself near the windows overlooking Victoria's garden, observing the social dynamics I'd never been invited to witness before. These people moved with the confidence of inherited wealth and established power, their conversations peppered with references to private clubs, vacation homes, and business dealings worth millions. You must be Sophia, said a distinguished woman in her 60s, approaching with a champagne flute in hand. I'm Eleanor Whitfield. Victoria tells me you're making quite a name for yourself in the culinary world. I'm trying to, I replied, unsure how much Victoria had actually shared about my background. Modest. I like that. Victoria mentioned you. Trained at Johnson & Wales and worked with Antoine Dubois. He has quite a reputation for excellence and temperament. The conversation continued with Eleanor asking knowledgeable questions about my techniques and inspirations. Other guests joined our discussion, revealing themselves to be surprisingly informed about food and restaurant culture. We're all foodies. Here, explained Dr. Patricia Morse, a prominent cardiologist. Living in Boston means we're spoiled for choice when it comes to excellent restaurants. As the evening progressed, I found myself genuinely enjoying the conversations. These people were accomplished professionals who appreciated expertise in any field. They asked about my creative process, my career goals, my opinions on current culinary trends. For the first time since meeting Marcus, I felt like I was being evaluated for my actual capabilities rather than my social pedigree. Richard Henderson approached me during cocktail hour, his manner more respectful than I'd ever experienced. "Sophia, I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "Victoria and I made assumptions about your background and ambitions that were clearly incorrect. Thank you for saying that. We're not used to meeting people who understate their accomplishments rather than exaggerate them. In our experience, people are usually eager to promote their credentials and connections. I wasn't trying to be mysterious. I just wasn't sure my professional background was relevant to being part of your family." Richard considered this. "Perhaps. We made it seem irrelevant through our focus on other factors. That was our mistake." During dinner, the conversation flowed easily around topics ranging from local politics to international travel. I contributed to discussions about restaurant openings, food trends, and culinary personalities, finding myself relaxing into the role of expert rather than outsider. When my desserts were served, the response was unanimously enthusiastic. Several guests asked detailed questions about my techniques, with one woman mentioning she'd dined at Le Bernardin recently and specifically requested to compliment the pastry chef. "That was me," I said, realizing she'd been one of many diners who'd sent praise back to the kitchen without my knowing their identities. "The entire meal was exceptional, but your dessert was the highlight. I've been telling friends they absolutely must try Le Bernardin's pastry program." As coffee was being served, Marcus stood up and tapped his wineglass for attention. "Before the evening ends, Sophia has some news to share that I think you'll all find exciting." Every face turned toward me expectantly. I felt my cheeks warm as I prepared to make an announcement that would fundamentally alter these people's perception of me. "I was recently nominated for a James Beard Award," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "For Outstanding Pastry Chef." The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Applause erupted around the table, followed by a chorus of congratulations and questions about the ceremony. Several guests mentioned knowing previous James Beard winners, placing me in an elite company I'd never imagined joining. "This is extraordinary," Eleanor exclaimed. "Do you realize how significant this recognition is?" Victoria beamed as if she'd personally orchestrated my success. "We're so proud to have such talent in our family." The possessive pronoun struck me as both amusing and telling. Now that I represented prestige rather than embarrassment, I had been fully claimed by the Henderson clan. "When is the ceremony?" asked Dr. Morse. "Next month in Chicago. You simply must let us know the results. We'll be watching the announcement." As the evening wound down and guests began departing, many made a point of seeking me out for private conversations. Business cards were exchanged, dinner invitations extended, professional connections offered. I was being welcomed into a network of influence and opportunity that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. Victoria approached me as I was collecting my empty dessert plates. "Sophia, I want you to know how grateful I am for this evening. You've been gracious and professional despite having every reason to be angry with Richard and me." "I'm not angry," I said, which was mostly true. "I just wanted the chance to show you who I actually am." "You've certainly done that. I hope you can forgive our initial misconceptions about your character and potential. Everyone makes assumptions based on limited information. The important thing is being willing to revise those assumptions when you learn more." Victoria smiled, perhaps recognizing the gentle reproach embedded in my diplomatic response. "I have a confession," she continued. "I've already made reservations for 12 at Le Bernardin next weekend. I want to experience your work in its proper setting, and I want our friends to see firsthand what an exceptional chef my future daughter-in-law has become." The evening had been a complete reversal of every interaction I'd had with Marcus's family. Instead of judgment and condescension, I'd received respect and admiration. Instead of being made to feel inadequate, I'd been celebrated as an accomplished professional. But as Marcus and I drove home through Boston's quiet streets, I felt oddly empty rather than triumphant. The validation I'd craved for so long had finally arrived, but it had come at the cost of revealing how conditional their acceptance had always been. "That went better than I could have imagined," Marcus said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "Did you see my parents' faces when you announced the nomination?" "I saw them," I replied. "I also saw how quickly they were able to rewrite history about how they've always supported my career." "Does it matter? The important thing is that they see you clearly now. The important thing is that their opinion of me changes based on external validation, rather than getting to know me as a person." Marcus was quiet for several blocks. "Are you saying you didn't enjoy tonight?" "I enjoyed it. But I also learned something about your family that I'm not sure I like." "What's that?" "That their love and respect are conditional on achievement and status. What happens if I don't win the James Beard Award? What happens if Le Bernardin doesn't work out? Do I go back to being an embarrassment they have to tolerate?" The questions hung between us as we pulled into our apartment complex. I'd gotten what I thought I wanted, recognition from the Henderson family. But the victory felt hollow because it was based on accomplishments rather than acceptance of who I was as a human being. The weeks following Victoria's dinner party brought unexpected complications. Media attention from my James Beard nomination led to interview requests from food magazines, invitations to culinary events, and recognition that felt both thrilling and overwhelming. The New York Times featured a profile piece about rising stars in American pastry, with my story taking center stage. The article described my journey from diner waitress to James Beard nominee, painting it as an inspiring tale of hidden talent finally receiving recognition. What the writer couldn't capture was the complexity of navigating success while questioning whether the relationships in my life were built on genuine connection or conditional acceptance. Marcus seemed energized by the media attention, proudly sharing articles on his social media and introducing me at industry events as his award-nominated fiancé. But I noticed how he emphasized my achievements rather than my character, as if my professional success had finally made me worthy of his pride. The Henderson family underwent their own transformation. Victoria began inviting me to her charity board meetings, introducing me as an expert who could advise on fundraising dinners and catering decisions. Richard mentioned my nomination during business conversations, using my success as a way to elevate his own social standing. "It's wonderful that they're finally embracing your career," Carmen observed during one of our catch-up calls. "But doesn't it bother you that their acceptance requires external validation?" "I'm trying to focus on the positive," I replied, though her question echoed my own concerns. "Sophia, honey, you've spent 2 years trying to earn these people's approval. Now that you have it, you seem less happy than when you were fighting for it." She was right. The recognition I'd craved felt hollow because it was based on achievements rather than understanding. The Hendersons respected Sophia, the acclaimed chef, but I wasn't convinced they would have accepted Sophia, the person without the professional credentials to back up my worth. The tension came to a head 3 weeks before the James Beard ceremony. Marcus and I were having dinner at a restaurant near Le Bernardin when he brought up our postponed wedding plans. "Mom thinks we should reschedule the wedding for after the award ceremony," he said, cutting into his steak. "She wants to plan something bigger, more elaborate. Now that you're famous, she thinks we should make a statement." "A statement about what?" "About our families coming together. about celebrating your success, about showing everyone that the Hendersons recognize and support exceptional talent. The phrase, "now that you're famous," stuck in my throat. What if I don't want something bigger and more elaborate? Come on, Sophia, you've earned the right to celebrate. Besides, think about the networking opportunities. Mom's guest list would include food critics, restaurant investors, culinary school deans. It could be incredible for your career. I set down my fork, my appetite disappearing. So our wedding reception should be a professional networking event? That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. You want to use our wedding to showcase my career achievements because now they reflect well on your family. Marcus looked genuinely confused by my frustration. I thought you'd be excited about this. My parents are finally embracing your ambitions, supporting your career, treating you like the accomplished professional you are. But they're not treating me like the person I am. They're treating me like an asset that adds value to their social portfolio. Our argument continued through dessert and into the car ride home. Marcus couldn't understand why I was upset about receiving the recognition I'd always wanted. I couldn't explain why validation that required professional achievement felt less meaningful than acceptance based on personal connection. The breaking point came the following weekend when Victoria called to discuss wedding venue options. She'd made appointments to tour 3 exclusive locations, each more expensive and elaborate than our original plans. "I've been thinking about the guest list," she said during our phone conversation. "We should invite the James Beard Foundation, board members, the food critics who've written about you, perhaps some of the other nominees. It would be such a wonderful way to establish your position in the culinary community." Victoria, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but Marcus and I originally wanted something smaller and more intimate. Darling, you can't have a small wedding now. You're a public figure, a celebrity chef. People expect a certain level of celebration. The word celebrity made me cringe. I'm not a celebrity. I'm a pastry chef who got nominated for an award. Don't. Be modest, dear. You're making a name for yourself, and the family should celebrate that appropriately. After hanging up, I sat in my apartment kitchen surrounded by the tools of my trade, and felt more isolated than I had when the Hendersons dismissed me as insignificant. At least then, their rejection had been honest. Now their acceptance felt like a performance based on my ability to enhance their reputation. That evening, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. I called my contact at the James Beard Foundation and requested information about the awards ceremony protocols, not because I was confident about winning, but because I needed to understand what this recognition actually meant for my future. The conversation revealed something I hadn't fully considered. James Beard nominees often used the recognition as a launching pad for cookbook deals, television appearances, restaurant investments, and brand partnerships. The award wasn't just professional recognition. It was a pathway to celebrity and commercial success. Many nominees find their lives change dramatically after the ceremony, explained Sarah Martinez from the foundation. Win or lose, the exposure creates opportunities most chefs never imagined possible. As she described the media attention, business, proposals, and career possibilities that typically followed nomination, I realized I was standing at a crossroads. I could embrace the trajectory toward culinary celebrity that the Hendersons now enthusiastically supported, or I could find a way to maintain my authentic identity despite external pressures. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Le Bernardin. Antoine Dubois appeared during prep time, his presence immediately commanding attention from the entire kitchen staff. "Sophia," he called out in his familiar commanding tone. "We need to talk." Chef Winters gave me permission to take a break, clearly impressed that the legendary chef had come specifically to see me. We walked to a quiet corner of the prep area where Antoine could speak without being overheard. "I have been reading about your nomination, your success, your upcoming marriage into a prominent family," he began. I am proud of your achievements, but I am concerned about your motivations. My motivations? When you worked for me, your passion was pure. You cooked because you had to, because the creativity demanded expression. Now I see interviews where you talk about career goals and networking opportunities. You sound like a businesswoman, not an artist. Antoine's observation hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. Success requires business considerations. Success requires authenticity. The moment you start cooking for critics instead of diners, for recognition instead of satisfaction, you lose what made your food special in the first place. He pulled out his phone and showed me a recent interview I'd given to a culinary magazine. Reading my own quotes, I barely recognized the person speaking. I sounded polished, professional, and completely disconnected from the passionate cook, who had once stayed up all night perfecting a single sauce. Your fiancé's family, they celebrate you now because you bring them prestige, Antoine continued. But what happens when the attention fades? When the next young chef becomes the media darling? Will their acceptance survive your return to ordinary success? The questions forced me to confront truths I'd been avoiding. The Hendersons' support felt conditional because it was conditional. Victoria's enthusiasm for my career had nothing to do with understanding my passion for cooking and everything to do with my ability to enhance her social standing. "What are you suggesting I do?" I asked. "Remember why you started cooking. Remember who you were before you needed anyone else's approval to feel worthy." That afternoon, I called in sick to work for the first time since starting at Le Bernardin. Instead of spending the day creating desserts for paying customers, I went home and cooked for myself. Simple dishes that brought me joy rather than professional. Recognition: I made my grandmother's rice pudding, a recipe I hadn't attempted in years. I prepared fresh pasta with herbs from the windowsill garden I'd been neglecting. I baked bread that filled my apartment with the smell of home rather than the aroma of sophistication. For the first time in weeks, I felt connected to the reasons I'd fallen in love with food. The creativity, the comfort, the ability to nurture others through nourishment. None of it required external validation or professional accolades. Marcus found me that evening sitting at our kitchen table, eating homemade bread with butter and honey. "You look different," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "Different how?" "Calmer. More like yourself." "I've been thinking about Antoine's visit today, about his concerns regarding my motivations." "What kinds of concerns?" I explained. Our conversation, Antoine's observations about my changing priorities, and my own growing discomfort with the conditional nature of his family's acceptance. Marcus listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but not immediately, jumping to defend his parents' behavior. "I think," he said finally, "that I've been so relieved by my family's approval of you that I didn't question why their opinion changed so dramatically. And now? Now I'm wondering whether their acceptance says more about their values than your worth." The conversation continued late into the night, both of us acknowledging truths we'd been avoiding. Marcus admitted he'd felt pressure to prove his choice of partner was acceptable to his parents. I confessed that earning their approval had required me to become someone I wasn't sure I wanted to be. "What do you want to do about the wedding?" Marcus asked as we prepared for bed. "I want to marry you," I said without hesitation. "But I want our wedding to reflect who we actually are, not who your family thinks we should be. Even if that disappoints them, especially if that disappoints them. Their disappointment will reveal whether they're celebrating our love or showcasing their association with my professional success." The next morning, I called Victoria to inform her we would be returning to our original wedding plans. Small, intimate, focused on our commitment rather than my career achievements. Her reaction was immediate and telling. "But darling, you can't possibly have a simple wedding now. Think about what people will expect, what the media will say." "I'm thinking about what Marcus and I actually want." "What you want and what's appropriate aren't always the same thing, dear." The conversation ended with Victoria clearly frustrated. by my refusal to embrace the elaborate celebration she'd envisioned. But for the first time since receiving my nomination, I felt like I was making decisions based on my own values rather than external expectations. 3 days later, Marcus came home with news that would test every assumption we'd made about his family's transformation. "My parents want to uninvite you from next weekend's family dinner," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Because of the wedding plans?" "Because they think you're being ungrateful and difficult. They say they've offered you everything you should want, and you're rejecting their support out of stubbornness." The speed of their withdrawal confirmed my worst suspicions about the conditional nature of their acceptance. The moment I asserted independence from their vision of my success, I became ungrateful and difficult rather than autonomous and self-directed. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "I told them that if you're not welcome at family dinner, then I won't be attending either." It was the first time Marcus had chosen me over his parents' wishes without reservation or apology. Whatever else happened, I finally knew where his loyalties lay when forced to choose. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.